We now turn our attention to our next speaker, Ian Gotts, founder and CEO of Elements.cloud, a tech advisor, executive, speaker, prolific author, and music enthusiast. With over 20 years of business analysis experience, Ian's expertise with change intelligence positions him to be a thought leader and execution leader in the AI space. As contributing author for Salesforce, Ben, and his willingness to share best practice, he now brings us his insights on the impact of AI in Salesforce careers and skills. Get ready to ride the wave of GPT without drowning as Ian shares his wisdom. Welcome to the stage, Ian Gotts.
So thank you for joining us for the last session of GPT Dreaming. It's been a fantastic week, and part of my session, I'll try and draw some threads together from what we've heard over the last 5 days. So I want to spend some time talking about how to ride the wave of GPT without drowning. And I think it's all about careers and skills. I mean, as we've heard over the last 4 or 5 days, there's so much information out there, and the confused mind often says no. And sometimes it's just picking your way through that and working out what's important, what should you focus on. So the panel session yesterday, it was very clear that organizations are taking sometimes a bit of a wait and see attitude. What should we use? What products might we use? What architecture? Because it's quite complicated. But the other message that came out of yesterday was, as an individual, you can't take a wait and see attitude. You need to make sure you dive in, and obviously not drown, but dive in and start understanding how GPT works, starting to play with it, starting to get confident with it. As Vernon said, this is the next big technology revolution, like the iPhone. It's a huge technology revolution that's hitting all of us. You don't want to be the guy with the flip phone going, hang on, how did you find your way here? And they went, oh, it's Google Maps. Oh, well, I only have a flip phone. You don't want to be the flip phone guy. Sadly, the next GPT Dreaming is not going on a cruise, or maybe it will be. But I want to show you a short video.
Hi, it's me, Jennifer Lopez, Chief Celebration Officer of Virgin Voyages, here to invite you to celebrate. So come, celebrate
your anniversary, your birthday, or just generally being fabulous.
Really, Kyle?
It's good, right?
Gen AI is supposed to be inviting people to Virgin Voyages, not doing whatever that was. You know, just give me that. As I was saying,
why not celebrate on
an award-winning voyage
with Michelin-starred, chef-curated menus,
world-class destinations, award-winning.
Boring. I'll hop in there. I'll hop right in that suit.
So supple.
I can't watch this. Give it to me. There's no kids here. That's all you need to know.
No kids!
Oh, can I live there?
Gen AI. Invite your crew to Voyage. Create your custom invite at virginvoyages.com.
It's not just a yacht, it's a super yacht.
Now, that's a fun video, but I think there's some really important messages that come out of it. So number one, if people didn't understand AI, none of the joke or the cleverness of that ad really works. People need to understand what AI can do. So I think whilst everyone's talking about AI and maybe it's not being implemented yet, there's certainly a level of awareness, and ChatGPT has certainly driven a level of awareness about it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as a marketing geek, I just love that. They used it to drive 4 different messages about Virgin Voyages. But I think the last thing, which is really interesting, is, was that real? Was that really Jennifer Lopez, or was that actually AI creating that Jennifer Lopez? So there's quite a lot of messages going in there, which is, I'm sure it was real actors, but in another year or two, do we really need those actors? And who wrote the script for that? So if you think about it, at the moment in the US, the script writers are on strike, as are the actors, about whether they're being paid fairly and the implications of AI. So again, just fun video, great bit of marketing, but actually there's a lot you can pick out of this. And the underlying message is that AI is changing every aspect of our lives. This was a quote from Bill Gates, which Mike Leach used in his session on Tuesday, and I stole it. But it's like, we always overestimate the change which will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate what will happen in the next 10. So it says, don't be lulled into inaction. So I think we'll those of us who are going to Dreamforce, we'll hear a lot about what's possible, what's coming, and maybe we'll overestimate what happens in 2 years, but certainly what will happen in 10 years we will completely underestimate. And I think we need to prepare ourselves now to make sure that we're ready, because I mean, this was Bill Gates back in 95. I think maybe we underestimate what in 2 months and underestimate in 10 months. I mean, AI is accelerating everything. So I just want to go for another quote here, which was from Mark Benioff. The coming wave of generative AI will be more revolutionary than any technology innovation that's come before in our lifetime, or maybe in any lifetime. It's reshaping our world in ways that we've never imagined. This AI revolution is just getting started. And it couldn't be truer. This is one of the largest transitions that we're probably going to see in our business lifetime. And I just have one last quote here from William Gibson. The future's already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And what I mean by that is that if we're all engaged in AI, and again, you're already engaged because you're here, so thank you for turning up, but you've already taken a view that this is important. I'm going to spend valuable time that could be spent elsewhere. You spent it with us, so thank you for that. But you've already said, look, this is important. For every one of you, there's 1,000 people who are going, is it really that big an issue? But because we're spending our time thinking about it, we assume everybody else is, and that's not necessarily true. But those people who are thinking about it, who are at the forefront, are the people who are going to benefit as the changes come through. So really, I want to spend some time thinking about some of the skills that we need, and then how to get them in a way that's not overwhelming. Because we all have day jobs, we all have lives, we all have other things that we want to go and do. We can't be entirely consumed around just thinking about AI, although clearly if you wanted to, there's more than enough to keep you occupied just trying to keep on top of it 24/7. So a couple of things. I want to talk about what AI is. People talk about artificial intelligence. Again, the marketing geek in me is sort of playing with other ideas. So AI is augmented intelligence. It's assisted intelligence, and ideally it's actionable. Augmented, it makes the best things better. It makes the worst things worse. One of the comments that came out of the panel session is that AI punishes mediocrity. If you write poor prompts, you write poor process maps, it will give you appalling user stories. If you write really good process maps, it will write really good user stories. So again, it's going to highlight those people with the strongest skills. The second point is assisted intelligence. It's not going to replace us, but it is, when used well, going to be a really powerful assistant. And I think the last piece is actionable intelligence. Again, we can debate intellectual things about how the world's going to change, but unless we start using it to make a difference, we're never going to get the level of adoption. We're never going to let it have it make a difference to the way we work, what we can do for our own education, what we can do for the companies we work for. So one of the things I talk about a lot is trying to help people understand the difference between what we're currently seeing and what the potential is. So I'm sure most of us here can drive, and there's a Honda Civic. Everyone else can drive that, and that's then the next one. That's a Porsche GT3. It's insanely fast. It probably shouldn't be allowed to be driven on the road. It's really a track car. Now, everyone's driven a Honda Civic, but very few of us, I've been very lucky to drive a full-on sports car on the track. And you leave the track going, wow, I now understand what it's like to be a Formula One driver. The levels of grip, the acceleration is unbelievable. But then if you went and talked to a Formula One driver, they'd be like, yeah, Ian, not really. Life is, as a Formula One driver, I mean, we pull 5G, a GT1 will pull only 1G. There's the steering wheel for a Formula One car. Okay, I wouldn't even be able to get a Formula One car off the grid. I'd stall it. I mean, I've no idea what all those buttons mean. And that's what a Formula One driver is. And I think that the reason for this analogy is that the Honda Civic is life without using GPT. The Porsche GT3 is ChatGPT. It's an amazing step forward from where we were not using GPT. But let's not be fooled into thinking that ChatGPT is the full extent of GPT. There is so much more it can do. So it's the same difference as the Porsche to Formula One. What we're now seeing around using GPT technologies embedded into apps is phenomenal, and way more than you typing in a prompt and getting an answer back. So I'm not suggesting that ChatGPT isn't amazing. It absolutely is. But let's not be bounded by thinking, okay, I understand how ChatGPT works. I understand how AI and GPT works. I spend a lot of time thinking about it, writing about it, but every day is a school day for me. Every day I'm learning new things. The last 4 days, watching some of the presentations of what people have been doing, blown away. I'd never even thought of some of the ideas that they come up with. And I think we need to have, I think Mark Benioff calls it a beginner's mindset. We need to be at the very beginning going, I'm constantly coachable. I'm constantly open to actually what's possible. And I think this analogy of Honda, Civic, Porsche, Formula One is really important, which is even if you think you're at the very of seeing what's potential, there's so much more that it can do. So with that said, let's think about some of the skills that we need. And I think it's actually more skills, it's not new roles. People talk about there's going to be a new role called a prompt engineer. I'm not sure I believe that's true. I think that we need to make sure that we all have a set of skills to use this technology. It's the same as when, I know, the internet came out and there was a book called The Internet for Dummies. You wouldn't have Internet for Dummies anymore because the internet is a pervasive technology. I'm sure there's a GPT for Dummies book, but in another year or two, that will be irrelevant because GPT is just a technology that gets used in lots of different ways. And the same way as there's no Google for Dummies, we've got used to using Google or Chrome in lots of different ways, and it's the same approach. So I want to think about several different skill sets and how they're likely to change. And it says at the top there, delegate, don't abdicate. What I mean by that is we should be using AI to support us and do a better job. We need to delegate it. And just like any delegation, we need to make sure we've set the criteria, what we want, we've delegated the piece of work, set the scope. And then when the work comes back, we then need to validate it and go, okay, well, actually, do we need to coach? Is it better? Have you come up with the wrong answer? Was the way I set the scope wrong, which is why the answer you've come back with is wrong. We can't abdicate. We can't go, oh, AI did this. It's given me the answer back. I'll just take it. So to be able to delegate, we absolutely need to know how to do the job. So this is not a case of saying, well, AI will do that for me. No, you need to be able to coach, shape, manage AI so it works well. So there's not new roles, but I think there are new skills or enhanced skills that we need to learn. And this is whether you're an architect, a consultant, an admin, a developer, a business analyst, any of those skills in the Salesforce ecosystem, a platform owner, the CIO, every one of us needs to understand how GPT will impact these different areas. If you're a business analyst, then obviously there's a lot more depth. Maybe you go into the business analysis area. If you're an admin, maybe there's more effort in prompt engineering. But every one of us needs to think about how we improve the skills in each of these different areas. And as I said a little bit earlier, AI punishes mediocrity. It will reward those who are really, really good at this stuff. So now is the time to double down and get good at the core skills, because that will actually give us a good solid foundation to make sure we can use AI effectively. So one of the questions that's popped up is, do we think Salesforce will come up with certification on generative AI? I think back to my comment about we won't see AI for dummies. I think we'll start to see how generative AI is used in particular aspects. I think it's very difficult to say that there's a certification about generative AI. Certainly, we've got Mark Goods created AI Force training, which I think is, rather than a certification, it's a great grounding, so I shouldn't use the word grounding because that's a particular AI term. It gives you a great foundation to understand how the technology works. And I think the issue with any certification is that with something that's moving so fast, it's immediately going to be out of date. I mean, the business analysis certification, the principles of business analysis have been around a long time, and the certification, I think, gave people a chance to go, look, I've been doing this, I've now got a cert that shows I can do it, rather than learning new things. So I think trying to create a cert for generative AI with, again, A, hard, and B, will probably be invalid quite quickly. let's think about each of these different areas: prompt engineering, data governance, business analysis, architecture, and documentation. But first I want to start thinking about the software delivery lifecycle, because when we're doing any of this work, we're essentially augmenting, improving our application, the way that Salesforce works, the way our other core systems work. So if we're using a prompt somewhere in we're essentially, it's part of an application. So I think it's worthwhile thinking of it in the context of the delivery lifecycle. So obviously we've got the idea, you plan, that's the business analysis, you build, whether it's code or declarative, you then test, you merge and test, you do user acceptance testing, and you release. And that's the development life cycle. And if I'm thinking about particularly prompts at the moment, let's think of a prompt as not something you type in, but it's actually almost akin to code. It's something you need to manage around a delivery life cycle. If I think about software, we've got, in terms of the risk of making changes, declarative, the least risk, because of course there are certain things you can and can't do. It's controlled by the platform. Clearly you can get yourself into trouble with declarative code, but it's the lowest risk. Medium risk is where you code, and obviously the highest risk is someone who's written a virus. It's a huge risk to your systems. So where does prompting fit in that? I think prompting is just above virus. And let me qualify that before people start throwing their hands up in horror. A prompt, you're essentially, if you're, say, putting a prompt into, say, Sales Cloud and asking it to go and write an email, well, first of all, you've essentially written some code. You've actually said to the large language model, use this data and then come back with a result, please. Okay. If you've coded that, you know exactly what the answer is going to be. The compiler doesn't change. You write that code, it comes back with this answer. If you've written a flow, a declarative flow, you write what you want the flow to do, and it does it every single time, every single time. When I write a prompt, I'm going to a large language model to come back with an answer. That large language model could be evolving. As they start to evolve, make changes, as it learns, the result you're going to get back from that prompt will change over time. And that adds a whole new dimension to the way we're thinking about what we're doing with a prompt. So we think about the prompt lifecycle, and obviously Salesforce is launching Prompt Studio, but I think that's just the very beginning. We need to start thinking about what else do we need to put around a prompt engineering platform to manage these prompts as though they were code, as though they were high-risk code. So fine, we've got to define requirements. So what are we trying to get out of the prompts? We need to try and define some acceptance criteria. What's a good prompt look like? We then need to go and write the prompt. And obviously writing a prompt is not like writing code, because or dragging and dropping a flow, because we write a prompt and actually we're still in the early days of understanding how to write prompts really well to get the result we want. So Sari Lazinski, who's the VP of product at Elements, he's been using GPT since it first came out, so 8 months now, and it's got really good at writing prompts. And what we've discovered is the longer the prompt, the more detailed the prompt, the better the answer. Don't type a prompt in that's like, could you give me this? And then back and forth, no, can you refine it? Can you refine it? Can you refine it? Better to actually write a far tighter prompt. Maybe it could be 2 or 3 paragraphs in terms of what you want, and you'll get a better answer out first time. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the prompts that we've embedded inside Elements GPT, they took 3 days to optimize a prompt to make sure it writes user stories in the way. So this is not like, oh, I'll type it to see what happens. If you're writing a prompt that maybe your sales team are using to write an email, which is going to be used by 1,000 reps 5 times a day, there's a huge, you need to really, really, really work hard to make sure that prompt's been optimized. It's not just write it once. So there's quite a lot of iteration to how do we, just changing the order of words gives you a dramatically different answer. Just thinking about the way you phrase things. And there's a whole skill we need to there in terms of how we actually make these prompts get better and better and better, particularly if they're being used at scale. We're embedding them against a button inside Salesforce, which then multiple agents or multiple sales teams are using. So therefore, the whole concept of testing a prompt. So I test it and it's given me the results I expected. Okay, we need to match that against the acceptance criteria. But again, what are we expecting from a prompt? I mean, if we've got a flow, we know what the actions are, what the outcomes are. What are we really expecting to get out of that prompt? And then if the prompt is sending an email to somebody, are we testing whether it just created an email or whether the email that got sent out actually got the conversion that we expected? So we need to think a little bit more broadly about what testing means. This is code. We need to think about how we manage versions of prompts. There's no point writing a prompt that's absolutely off the charts, amazing, and then no one else in the company's ever heard about it. So whether you're using a prompt that's embedded inside an application, or maybe your marketing team have got really good at writing prompts that are for writing LinkedIn posts. We need to be able to share that, iterate them, manage them, so we can actually make them better and better. Going back to our own internal teams, Savri and his team have built a series of prompts, some prompt templates that they reuse. It automatically builds our internal website about all new products that are coming out. So they built some prompts where they insert certain bits of text associated with a new feature, and it automatically goes and builds our internal website, our lab's website, so our teams understand what functionality is coming out in the future. So that's reusability of prompts, which means we need to version them. We need to make sure that everyone else understands how to access them. So again, prompts have actually suddenly given us a whole new perspective. It's way, well, it's the Wild Wild West. It's way more complex than just declarative or writing code. And I think we need to change our mindset from thinking, wow, that's cool, I wrote a prompt. It's like a Google search. No. It's way more profound than just writing a Google search. And you're about to see with the next point, wow, a whole bunch of new things we need to think about. So these prompts that are being used, I mean, how are they performing? Are they doing what we expect? So how many people use that prompt? And then if it's an email that's getting sent out, is it doing what we expect it to do? How do we then refine it? How do we make changes? How do we do the versioning? And the next two, I think, maybe new terms. How do we understand what drift there is? So I wrote a prompt today, it's hitting the large language model today, and it's giving me a set of results. But that large language model, they may create a new version, or it's learning new things. How much is that prompt changing? So if I look at it in a week's time, or in a month's time, how different is that prompt from the one that we did today? And is it drifting in the right direction? Is it getting better or is it getting worse? Do we need to go and refine it? So we need to monitor it. So if it's a very high risk prompt that's getting sent out with an email, maybe we need to be monitoring that weekly or daily. If it's actually an internal email that maybe has less of an issue, maybe we monitor that monthly. But again, a whole new concept of monitoring something for drift. We'd never do that in code. We know when the new release comes out 3 times a year in Salesforce, we know there's going to be an impact. But this impact, because we're accessing a third-party model, could be changing every day. And the other thing is that a prompt actually has dependencies. If you've got metadata embedded in that prompt, say it's an amount field, that's cool. Okay, that's great. It's pulling the amount field and it's sending it in an email, or it's sending it, Flow's doing something with it. But if the admins don't know that that field is being used by a prompt, and they decide they're actually going to reuse that field, or that field originally was amount, which was only, say, software licenses, but we're now going to use it for consulting revenue. Or even worse, it was a dollar field, but now we're multi-currency, and we've decided we're going to put a separate field next to it that says, what's the currency? And we can put any currency in there. The prompt won't know that. The prompt just looks at the amount field. So suddenly we're now putting sterling in there, which is like 1.2 of a dollar, or we're putting euros in. AI doesn't care. It's just making decisions for you. It doesn't care. It's picking that number off. Unless we understand that the metadata used in that prompt has been changed, and we go back and understand whether the prompt has changed, AI can be making decisions for us. We also need to make sure there's a human in the loop about, okay, how do we check that? But my example of currency, it may only be 10% off. It's not going to be wildly off. AI is still making the decisions for us, but based on false data. So again, we need to think about how the prompt lives as part of the dependencies if it's accessing metadata. I know that feels like a lot, but actually we need to get beyond thinking, oh, it's kind of like a Google search, but cooler. Yeah, it is, but it's way scarier. We need to put some guardrails around this and think about how we manage prompts. Wow, that was a lot. But this whole idea of understanding how prompts work, I think we've spent a bit more time digging into a bit more detail here, but you can see it's a little bit more involved. But again, if you're thinking about this, you're ahead of the game. So the next thing I said was about data governance. I think it was Clara Shih said, data is the fuel for AI. So the first thing is, if we're going to be putting data into the AI model, we need to understand, first of all, is it the correct field? I've got 4 amount fields. I've got 3 industry fields. Which one really is it? And we need to be using a change intelligence platform, something like Elements, to understand, okay, which field should we really be looking at? But then we need to look upstream and work out how that field is being populated. Because we need to make sure we've got clean data, and we need to understand where it's coming from. And that may not just be within Salesforce. It could be through MuleSoft into a third-party system. So we need to look upstream, number one. Number two, we need to make sure we have an understanding about how we govern those fields. We can't have people making changes to them without us understanding. We certainly can't be having people importing Excel spreadsheets into those fields. We need to make sure we have a clear understanding about what data is being populated and where it's going to. None of this is new, by the way. We should have been doing this anyway. It's just AI has suddenly made this way, way more important because, again, decisions are being made on the back of this data. And I think the first activity when we start thinking about implementing AI is understanding a data flow diagram, this thing we've got in front of us. That happens to be drawn using the Salesforce diagram standard using Elements.cloud. But there's a standard that Salesforce has come up with about how you draw these diagrams. And they look beautiful, which means they're easy for people to understand. We all need to have an understanding about architecture. Now, that's a pretty scary looking diagram. And when we create the video of this and the deck, there's a link to a YouTube video that explains this. But this is sort of the AI architecture for Salesforce. Now, you don't need to get into every single level of detail, but you need to understand the implication of what's happening if we're using AI in our systems. We can't be starting to use AI naively, but not really understanding what's going on behind the scenes. We need to at least have an understanding about what's happening, and therefore we can understand the risk of the things that we're doing. So as I said, suddenly the whole idea of AI is raised the ante. It's suddenly made things significantly higher risk in terms of what we're now doing to our Salesforce systems, our platform, and also the third-party systems. So architecture is really important. And again, Salesforce has got well architected, but it's all now, and they're spending a lot more time talking about how AI fits into that, but also data architecture. Think about how you build entity relationship diagrams, how you draw data flow diagrams, some of those standards now about how you would be starting to document how things work. So I can't remember who said it. I think it was Nick Ham from 10K said, business analysis is the superpower. AI is going to raise a couple of the roles, and business analysis is clearly the one that is going to be pivotal. And it's not just because I care about business analysis, you know, I all do. I spend my time talking about it, but I think it really is pivotal because as people think about AI, they're going to have to change the way that their systems work to improve them. So they need a good understanding, the business analysis at the beginning to understand, okay, how could we change? Business analysis is needed to make sure we really bottom out those requirements. It's needed to make sure we understand how our existing systems work, so we understand the implications of making changes. And we need to make sure we're really good at writing those specifications, those user stories that get passed across to the development teams to go and build. So there's a bunch of acronyms on there. I think if you don't understand what those acronyms mean, then that's job one. Let's go and find out if you're a business analyst, what's the UPN, Universal Process Notation? That's the Salesforce Process Mapping Standard. If you're still using flowcharts, you need to move on. You need to start thinking about how you map processes that engage end users, and UPN is the standard that Salesforce has landed on. Okay. ERD, entity relationship diagrams. It's critical that you understand the data structure you have inside your org so you can start making decisions about how you improve it. And that requires drawing an entity relationship diagram, or at least being able to read one. Again, plenty of training on that. DFD, data flow diagrams. So I showed you an example, which is how you can start to describe how data flows across systems. I wouldn't expect you to know the next acronym because we've created it because we saw a gap. Metadata description definition. One of the things about AI is when it's reading documentation, it is reading it. It doesn't understand nuance. It doesn't make assumptions. It doesn't understand your quirky acronyms. It doesn't understand euphemisms. It reads it absolutely literally. So when we start thinking about AI as reading our metadata to create recommendations, it does a reasonable job, actually, if you're just using the API names and the labels, provided you haven't changed the use of an object and not changed the name. But if you put good descriptions in, but are really concise in a certain structure, AI is off the charts in terms of what it can do. So we defined this thing called a MDD, a metadata description definition, to help you understand how you populate the descriptions on your metadata so AI can read it in a really, read it and do a really good job. Back to our teams in terms of their AI, because Elements GPT will automatically create user stories on the back of a process map. What we've discovered is, as the user stories come out, we've gone, oh, we could do a better job of mapping our processes in UPN. And it's helped us really, it's coaching us into how we write things in better ways to make sure that AI can do a better job for us. And I think as business analysts, our outcome is content. We need to make sure we're writing content that AI can read. And one of our key outputs is a user story. Now, a user story can be automatically written by GPT, but unless we understand what good looks like, how on earth are we going to validate that what was being created is good? And a user story is not just in a role, what I'm going to do and what's the outcome. We also need acceptance criteria. And there's something else called BDD, behavior driven development. It's a really good way of thinking about building test scripts, but it's actually quite time consuming to write. AI can write those for you. And suddenly we're dramatically improving what we're giving to our developers. So it's less ambiguous and they can do a better job. Now, a lot of this is covered by the BA certification. And even if you're not a BA, I would encourage you to go and work your way through the content with a mindset of I need to gain that BA certification. They've just taken away the requirement of you having to have a Salesforce admin cert. So there's no excuse for not doing it. So as I said, that documentation that we're creating, we need to get better at documenting what we've built in our orgs and how our business works. And that picture is showing it's being read by AI. AI is a 12-year-old who reads things literally and has a relatively short attention span, but reading it literally, just no nuance, no acronyms, no knowledge of how you made some assumptions. So we need to be a lot clearer about the documentation. Now, the really good news is most of you haven't got any documentation, so you've got a chance to do it correctly this time around. And whilst we understood business analysis and documentation was important, it's just become critical. Those organizations who have well-documented business processes, who've got well-documented orgs, will be able to take advantage of AI. And the sorts of benefits we're seeing is 100 times improvement in terms of productivity. Now is the time to start going back to the critical areas that in your org, not everywhere, but the areas that are critical, going back and looking at how well documented it is. So again, if you're looking at AI for, say, in the service world, let's make sure we've documented case. We know the key objects, the key fields, the key flows, and make sure they're documented. That AI can do an amazing job. So I've been through quite a lot, and obviously this video will be available online, and I've got some resources on the next slide. But we need to make this actionable. I mean, it'd be very easy to leave the 5 days with your head spinning, going, maybe I'll just wait until, and this will all pass through. It won't. We need to get on the ladder, start moving. And the first one, as I said, is reinforcing some of those core skills. Re-evaluating or going back and spending more time thinking about business analysis. Thinking about, I know, some great books like Jodie's book, Rock Your Roles as Salesforce Admin. There's some really good content there. There's stuff on Salesforce Bend. There's stuff that we've written that talks about how to become a better business analyst, how to get better at documentation, how to write process maps. None of this requires you to invest in AI. This is all about things that you are currently doing and just making sure that you're getting that much better, that much tighter, that much more precise in terms of some of the things you're doing. If you've never drawn a UPN diagram, get started. There's some videos, some fun videos we've got out there with Ryan Reynolds, the actor, and Ryan Gosling from Ken from Barbie, where we've interviewed them and created some process diagrams. So there are some fun ways of learning this, and there are plenty of organizations out there starting to coach you on that, people like Clicked. The next thing is to start playing with ChatGPT, so at least you understand what it can do. Let's make sure we don't think that I understand GPT, I understand everything, back to my Porsche and Formula One analogy. But let's get started. There's a free license. You can start playing with it, start using it, work out where it works for you, where it doesn't work for you. But again, as I said at the beginning, let delegate, don't abdicate. Notice the better the prompts you send in, the better the answers. So think about longer prompts and more precise prompts to get better answers out. Rather than going, could you write me this? Get an answer out. No, not happy with it. Back and forth, back and forth. See if you can get the prompt out first time that is a really, really good prompt to give you the perfect answer. Because that's where we need to get to. You need to be able to write good prompts first time round if we're going to then be including them as part of our applications. Which is then to the next point, which is, I went through that cycle of prompt engineering. Start thinking about what that means. How are you going to make that work in your organization if you're using prompts? Whether it's in the marketing team, whether it's in product development, whether actually it's around Salesforce. But let's think about how we're going to actually take advantage of prompts and start to manage them. And then the last thing, and I think the last one is probably the most difficult, is start looking at some of the GPT apps coming along. The problem is there's so much stuff coming out. I mean, Salesforce has got everything with the GPT on the end of it. There were some great apps that were presented on Tuesday that are coming out. Mark Good has done an analysis of some of the GPT apps. Again, don't need to spend a lot of time understanding how they all work in detail, but it will start to open your mind about what's possible. I certainly watched the last 4 days going, wow, I'd never thought about that as an angle. Every day is a school day. Every day I'm learning just another aspect about how this could be used. In fact, last night my son was showing me he'd written some code that goes back and forth to GPT several times to go and automatically create some standard letters that he wanted to do to start to encourage people to do the right thing around climate change. But he wanted multiple letters to come out in different styles, thinking about climate change from different perspectives, thinking about different states. So he actually built a routine that was going back and forth to GPT, picking a state, using GPT to understand the state, then going back into the climate change legislation, working out which ones were relevant, and then writing letters. Wow, never even thought of that as a use case. It does a phenomenal job. He wrote quite a lot of code to make it work, and several of the code is going back and forth to GPT to get different answers, then aggregating them to come out with the final answer. But really clever stuff that people are doing. And we know that that is happening in every country, in every company. And we need to make sure that at least you have an understanding, or you're keeping your mind open to what's possible. So I've gone through a lot very quickly. We spent a lot of time thinking about this, and maybe I made lots of mental leaps where you're going, oh, hang on a minute, what actually happened? Good news, the video is going to be available. I've also put together a little set of resources. So just some the list of resources could go on forever, but The top link there, AI GPT, is a link to our blog. We're constantly writing about GPT, coming at it from different perspectives. I mean, one of the blogs is about stealth GPT, this idea that GPT is creeping in through the back door, no one knows about it. Didn't have time to talk about it today, but we're constantly trying to take things from different angles, from a thought leadership perspective. It's not product, it's thought perspective, thought leadership. There's clearly the BA certification. Again, I just picked out a couple of things. UPN, there's quite a few articles that we've written. There's a trailhead course about UPN. There's the Ryan Reynolds video. There's the Ryan Gosling video. So there's no shortage of resources there, but start really with the GPT resources. We'll be sending out an email to all of you on Monday, so you've got access to all the sessions. So very happy to have been part of the first GPT Dreaming. Thank you everyone for attending. And I'd love to pass back to Mark, who can close out the week. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Ian, for sharing. I know a lot of Salesforce professionals making their own career pivots to focus on AI, and the information that you shared today, especially that actionable slide at the very end. I was just commenting in the chat on how important that is. This information is obviously invaluable to everyone else who wants to follow.